Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
I'd like to begin this podcast by acknowledging the Turrbal and the Yugara people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today to record this podcast. I also would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, Academy Associates. Thanks for choosing to listen to the BarbellJack Academy podcast, where our aim is to bring clinical research to real-life clinical practice. For further learning opportunities, why not access our educational webinars? To access, click on the link in the show notes. To keep up to date, join our Academy mailing list where you'll receive exclusive content, discounts on webinars, and more. Link to join us is also in the show notes. Welcome back to the BarbellJack Academy podcast. Today we have a new team member with us, Chloe. Hello, Chloe. How are you?
Hello. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
So, Chloe, you joined us a couple of months ago now.
Yeah.
When did you join us again?
I think it's been 2 months this week.
2 months already?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Time flies.
Does indeed when you're having fun, of course. Now, Chloe, your background, you have done a little bit of extra research and have delved into a lot of chronic pain in ex-phys. So can you just give a bit of a background about the extra study that you've done and, your experience with chronic pain in treating that?
Yeah, sure. So I've just finished a professional certificate in pain science, and that's run out of the UniSA team for health professionals in all different disciplines to upskill in chronic pain. And that came about at my previous workplace, working in a multidisciplinary practice and working with physios and OTs and ensuring that we had similar, language when working with clients with chronic pain. So that's how my interest started, and got suggested by a few colleagues to do some further research and work through into that course.
Yeah,
so,
great. Is that from some of the multidisciplinary team where you were? Had they done that course and then suggested from there?
Yeah, 3, 4 actually. Different colleagues had done that course previously.
Cool.
And they worked in a local pain educator program, and that's based around that certificate through UniSA. So
yeah, good.
they had good things to say about their certificate and how it was run. So I thought this would definitely be a good opportunity to do, especially how to adapt, our chronic pain language to lots of different clientele, because I think sometimes that can be a challenging part of where to start.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there's so much we can unpack about chronic pain and go through case studies, different language models, different treatment approaches. But today, what we might focus on is something a little bit different from what we've done previously. So just as a reminder for our listeners about what we've done previously around chronic pain topics, way back when we first started the podcast in, I believe it was 2021, we did a general one about chronic pain. So that's episode 2 if you wanted to go back and listen to that. We then did a specific analogy that with communicating and understanding pain, or the cup analogy. And then another one we did was around communicating pain, but it was using a specific principle, which is one method. And I'm sure there's many others, and I'm sure you can enlighten our listeners about that. And then the last one we did was, the most recent one we did was a case study for one of my clients actually, and the perceptions that they had, what I was trying to uncover, and there is that one is the most recent one around chronic pain. So listeners, if you wanted to jump back and listen into that to have a nice little package around chronic pain, then there are your episodes. But today, seeing as you probably know a lot more about it than me, we're going to unpack what in terms of chronic pain. What would you like to focus on today?
Sure. And like Dan said, there's lots of different things out there and lots of different approaches to take with chronic pain clients. And as a practitioner, I think it's about just finding what best resonates with you, and then what you think might best resonate with your particular clientele. And that might change from client to client, or how you run your sessions, etc. But I think a really nice topic to delve into a little bit more, and particularly has become a bit more of a focus point in the research lately has been about pain not always equaling damage. And I think on the flip side, we do know that pain is there when something damage does occur.
Yeah.
But also reminding, especially our patients, that their pain is not always coming up and meaning there's a new tissue damage or as well, because that can be a challenging topic.
100%. I've been an EP for over 10 years now, and I don't think I still have a firm grip on how to navigate that, because, I mean, everyone's going to be different about how they interpret it with their clients, but the amount of times that someone's come, even just by saying this and saying it doesn't always equal damage, but perhaps someone will come with a scan and say, but it says this.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be doing, deadlifts, or I shouldn't be doing squats, or I shouldn't be doing. So I'm really interested today about some things that you've learned from that course, the study that you've done about how to further navigate. And I'm sure our listeners will benefit from it as well, because I think we're still going to have everyone coming saying, hey, this is my scan.
Yeah.
It says I've got, lumbar disc bulges all the way through my lumbar spine.
Yes.
I'm immobilized, so I can't move under this. So, keen to unpack this. So pain doesn't always equal damage. Let's talk about how you explain that to a client first. Now, I know different methods, but what would be your general way of explaining that to a client?
Yeah. So I guess particularly if we're talking about that chronic pain client, I think in your subjective, it's all about getting to know the client and then trying to pull out those key little topics that you think might help them resonate, and that will help choose how you might be able to explain it. But I guess in terms of, there's a model called Twin Peaks, which has come out of the work we've done through UniSA. But an analogy you can help clients think about is they've got two mountains ahead of them. They've got the first mountain, which is them before their injury or onset of this chronic pain or a particular movement. And when they're going up that mountain, they get to that last 75% of the mountain, and that's when their pain started to kick in. So the knee's starting to get really sore, stopping them to do it. But then there's this line that's maybe at that 90% of the mountain. That is actually when there's actually damage, or we call tissue tolerance, is occurring. So we've got this like little buffer, so 75 to 90. That's probably the easiest way to describe without visualizing that.
So just to make sure I got that right, 75% you're feeling pain, but not necessarily damage. So that, say, 90% onward, it could be damage. Okay.
And that's that's how our body is designed, and it does it really well, that it allows us a warning system of that, hey, remember, I've got my knee here. If you keep pushing, then that's that potential of possible tissue tolerance or tissue damage. So there's always that little bit of buffer. And I think that can be challenging with a lot of clients, of getting to work into a little bit of discomfort or pain. So that's your first mountain. And then what happens when we've had these repeated exposures, we've got pain for a long time, we've got all the other factors that would have been touched on in the COP analogy podcast, is that this line, that 75% line, is now down at 65 or even 50. So that line, the point at which our pain is kicking in, is now a lot earlier, a lot sooner. So now I can only get halfway through that walk and my knee's starting to hurt. Which
the threshold's lowered.
Threshold's a lot lower, which for some people can be frustrating and they're not quite sure why, or that threshold might even play around depending on the day. But that tissue tolerance line is still relatively up the top. It has dropped slightly. So now what's happened, we've got that big buffer zone between when that pain's actually letting us know that's in pain and there's actually doing that damage at the top. So that can be a little bit confronting, but I guess the good thing to tell our clients is we can reduce that buffer zone, and we can build up, sometimes it's nice to say, that baseline, and we can build that baseline up a little bit by working in that zone of where we've got that little bit of discomfort. And no doubt people have touched on what's safe to move through, and they might have used this and the universal scale of 0 to 10 where they're happy to work in.
That was going to be my question that I led from there. it's a bit controversial. I don't want to hear your thoughts on it too, but I've definitely previously used, I don't so much anymore, or I pick my client that I use it with around that 0 to 10 pain scale.
Yeah.
So actually yesterday had a client, not so much categorized into chronic pain, but had a bit of soreness in his knee when he was doing a hack squat.
Yeah.
And I always say, is it tolerable to still work through this exercise for you? And usually for this particular client, he's like, yeah, brush it off. It's fine.
Yeah.
So he's kind of a bit more laid back. But then that raises a question for me. Is like, well, how do I know where I'm at with, the buff? How do I know whether I'm at where there's the pain percentage and then the actual damage percentage? Like, I would assume that he would respond with a far more like, no, it's too much. But then there's so many different opinions from people. Like, you're always going to get your client that is laid back and goes, yeah, push through pain. Pain is nothing to me. You've got to get, pain makes gain, all those things. But then you get the other ones who are super sensitive. Yeah. How do you navigate that?
It's tricky. And it will change client to client. Yeah. I think as like, I guess a baseline for me is always starting small and building onto it and being really open to your clients. Often I'll say to people that we're trying to start at a manageable load. I would even hope that maybe this first or second session feels relatively maybe easy. And then building up to that point that we're trying to push them a little bit more. For some people, a lot of exercises are going to be hard, no matter where we start them. So also then having that conversation with them of how much are they happy to have a little bit of discomfort. And then that kind of opens another can of worms of what's discomfort, what's pain.
That's it, because everything you can kind of define, like what's their definition of manageable load? What's their definition of discomfort?
Yes.
So you have to unpack all this with your client to understand what kind of route to take.
Yes.
In terms of the exercise prescription or the way that the client will respond.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think also understanding what they feel comfortable with. And that can even come around to just the environment they're within.
Yeah.
I think about the social, psychosocial factors that are going to influence how they respond to the exercise. For some people, the gym environment might just not be for them.
Yeah, it could be a huge trigger.
Overwhelmed. There's other people in the room, etc. So is it that we need more of a quieter space, or I'm going to show you this exercise, I want you to try it at home and then let me know how it goes.
Yeah.
It's that balance between. That doesn't really help the question.
No, I get what you're saying. And this is what we have spoken about in numerous podcasts before. Yeah. It's probably where I tangent off into this very frequently, but I am very big on looking at all possible factors within the biopsychosocial model. So you're exactly right. Like, what is their perception of actually even going to someone to address their pain? Is that already preempted their experience, and is that having a negative effect on their pain at that time? So, because I always find people when they come if they're in a pain cycle, you watch them come into the clinic, they put their bag over their head, put it in there, and then they sit down comfortably in the low chair, they get up and they come to you and you go, how are you feeling today? And because my thought on this is because they're in an environment where they can divulge their issues or they would need to, I feel like that already preempts them in a bit of a pain cycle. I'm like, oh, my shoulders are really sore. I can't lift anything overhead. I'm like, it's just sore. You put your bag. So I always ensure that you have to factor in all the considerable factors of what their experience has been with their pain, and then breaking that down and choosing the right way to go about.
Yeah.
I've gone tangent again, but I'll come back. Do you rely or use those 0 to 10 pain scales frequently in your practice? Have you used it, found issues, have you diverted away? What's your thoughts?
I wouldn't say I use it for everyone. I think particularly it can be a good scale, especially if you're in for workers' compensation, we're doing DVA reports. There is that objective measure that we've got out of it. But I think in a day-to-day or a session-to-session, I don't use it as much, especially for those clients that you don't want to necessarily for them to hyper-focus on to, how is my knee? Is it sore? Is it sore?
Yeah.
like anyone, if I asked you how your shoulder is and you had a shoulder injury a couple of years ago, you'd be like, oh, yeah, actually, it is feeling a bit.
Yeah.
So I think that's one way to put it, is more just how you've been coping with, for example, if it was a knee, how you've been coping with the stairs at home this week. Rather than a number figure, it might be, actually we went up and down a few times this week and didn't notice it.
Yeah.
So I think noticing those changes would be one of the things.
Okay.
And I think sometimes for some people it's better with some of the exercises, even just to get them in a motion that, say, might be a squat motion, but not calling it a squat. Or it might be utilizing something like a reformer, which, you can get into a deep squat position, but they don't associate that with a squat.
Yeah.
Because especially if someone's been to, I don't know, they might have been to specialist physios, different places, or a movement they know flares them, and they might tell you that in the session. There's probably no point getting them to try and do it because it's going to be sore. But is there ways that we can not necessarily trick them, but get them moving in that position without them knowing? So then we're taking away some of that already guarding movement and that relearned, or I guess that remembered experience where there was discomfort. And that kind of comes into back to that Twin Peaks, is that tissue tolerance is already, point at the pain's coming in is a lot lower, because we know that, or they might think that, every time I've squatted down to get that, I'm going to get pain. So all of a sudden their tolerance to do that is a lot lower because they've got all those remembered experiences and negative connotations to it.
Yeah. And that's, I truly believe in that too, where it's like doubling down on the negative impact on the pain and experience that they've had. Hello again. Thanks for taking the time to listen to our podcast. Another shout out to a sponsor that we have, the BarbellJack, where you can master your lifts to save time, energy, and lift like a pro. The BarbellJack isn't just any gym gadget though. It's your new best mate, designed to ensure a safe posture when changing weight plates. This is a must-have in your clinic. Embrace the power of professional lifting techniques and hit your personal records with ease. Use the code BODYTRACK to receive 10% off your order. Now back to the podcast. Going back to just you're tricking people into movement. Let's be real. We can trick them. We don't say that, but we are essentially doing that. I remember looking back and implementing into my practice as well, looking back on some things that I can't remember who it was, but it's either a physio that I was following or even Laura Mosley. Is instead of going, okay, if they have trouble with flexion rotation, their spine. Right? Don't go and go, let's flex and rotate or practice that movement or do a bow and arrow or whatever you might want to do. What they started to do is gamify it. So I'm going to throw a ball, you're going to flex and rotate and grab it, or blaze pods, perfect one. And I actually found so effective with one of my clients where the light would come on and they're having so much fun that they're reaching across, flexing, rotating through their spine constantly. In that moment though, obviously when you're doing it, like all I want you to do is hit the light that comes on the blaze pod, say. Afterwards, do you address it? And do you go, hey, do you realize you just did this? Do you think that's the way, like, to make them kind of realize, or do you leave it as is? I mean, obviously it's going to depend on the person again, but have you found strategies of making them realize that they've done that effective, or what's your position on that?
I think a bit of both. I think definitely just getting them to see if they can do the task, especially ball games, throwing, catching, balance type thing is a perfect example. People have this instinct to go back and just catch a ball and they might be able to do it. So I like to let them go to see if they can do the movement. And it might be 1 or 2 times we do it throughout the session, and at the end it'll be like, how you feeling? And then it might be that good opportunity to be like, hey, we actually moved in all those different positions that usually don't feel great for you. I think sometimes, depending how sensitive they perhaps are to that movement, or you think, I guess, afraid of that movement too, sometimes it could be nice to just do it at the end of the session, because sometimes they might get that guarding feeling coming back if you've just said, oh, you've just done it that time and now I want you to do it again. They might actually feel a bit worse with it.
Aware of it, aren't they?
Good point. So just again, depending on the client, or it might be that you might see them in a couple of days' time and be like, how'd you pull up? And they might have felt really great. And it's like, well, in that session, we actually did a lot of twisting and a lot of bending, and you tolerated that quite well.
Yeah.
So again, I think picking your moment, I think usually I tend to like to go towards the end of the session and then following up that next session just to remind them as well. Like, hey, remember we did that?
Yeah.
And actually, since I last seen you, you've pulled up quite well or tolerated that.
Yeah, for sure. Back to the Twin Peaks model.
Yeah.
So you were mentioning before, let's say pain onset 75%, the actual damage is at 90%.
Yeah.
And you were saying it can you know, fluctuate. It can go down to 60, 50%, whatever it might be. Have you seen that in your practice happen on a weekly basis, monthly, ebb and flow throughout?
Yeah.
Have you seen, obviously you can't, you know, put a percentage on it all the time, but have you seen someone come in and it's been perhaps that's, you know, pain tolerance of 75%, but then the tissue damage at 90%, and you just had to start slow and get them to reduce that buffer? But have you also had experience where you started there and it's actually increased?
Yeah.
And you've had to rethink and go through things there. Is there any examples that you can provide or situations in your experience about that?
Yeah, definitely. And that can be the tricky part, I guess. You might be tracking along really well, starting to get them to do a little bit more, and then you might just have this week that everything might seem like to them that everything's fallen apart. And I think, I guess that slow and pacing your loading and what we're doing with the client A in here can be a nice way, because then we know that we're not giving them too many things all at once to change. But then also I think it's just really important to have that open conversation with the client as well, and being like, what else has been going on this week? Particularly I can think of a client that, you know, we hadn't changed too much in terms of their programming, all the things have stayed the same there. But then they were like, oh yeah, had a really stressful day at work. I've now had to do this, family members unwell. And I guess they hadn't thought about how that was contributing to perhaps how they were holding themselves in their body. You know, stress, all those biosocial aspects can have an effect. So I think it's not dismissing that what's happening with their pain.
Of course.
But just having that honest communication, being like, also, there will be weeks that things come up. And you're just trying to best, I guess, nurture them in that time.
Yeah.
But it can be tricky to not panic and be like, oh, what have I done, or what have we changed? But knowing that sometimes there will be those weeks, and then we just see how we go. And is there modifiable things that we can help them with?
Yeah, great. And then I could go on tangents and talk about a million things with this, but I've only got one more question and then a bit of a wrap up. Have you had experiences where you've tried to explain the model, or you've tried different approaches about explaining that flare-up situation or chronic pain in general, and the person's been really dismissive of it?
Yeah.
How have you navigated that? Because that's definitely happened to me so many times.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of going, well, where do I turn?
Yeah.
Like I've used all my resources possible. I've given everything I can to my knowledge and my skill set, my skill level. What do I do from now?
Yeah.
So bit of experience in that.
Yeah, that's tricky, because some people have pretty firm views or beliefs about something, or they might have been already on this journey that they've had so many different opinions and information overload that they're just not ready to take on anything else new.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think, we just kind of got to respect that as well. And it might be that you don't try and broach anything at the start. You kind of get them in, get them moving, try to establish a bit of a routine. And then it might be little inklings of that general chit chat you're having in a session that you're then able to go, hey, do you mind if I explain a little bit more why that's happening?
Yeah.
And I guess a little bit of that, getting that permission for you to then give them that information. I think perhaps in general in the health world, we often get given all this information, but we're not always ready to take that on. So I think gauging how much capacity they have to delve into that. And that, again, comes into everything else in their life as well. At the moment, maybe they've just got way too much on their plate that they can't take. They're not ready to take in anything new.
Yeah, for sure. I think I've definitely been a victim of probably being too excited, to be honest, about learning and going, oh, surely they want to know about this.
Yes.
And so that's where you got to, as a practitioner, remove yourself from the situation and go, hey, what's actually happening? I'm treating them holistically. So perfectly said, you're evaluating all of their situations, their experiences. It's all about the client in the center of the model. And you've said it perfectly there. You're like, hey, do you mind if I just explain a little bit about why that might be happening?
Yeah.
You're not, the reaction there would often be if someone says, oh, the family stress or work stress, and then a pain's really bad, you would knee-jerk reaction and go, oh, well, this is probably why.
Yeah.
But you still have to, as a practitioner, be, all right, flip it around, ask for permission almost, because they need to be open to receiving that. Because as you said, it could be information overload and it's not really going to get in.
And they might not want to necessarily hear that from us. So it might be that you might say, I might send you this article or YouTube's a great place where if people like to watch something and have that visual analogy, that can also be a way that we can have those moments of education that we're still providing, but it's not that one-on-one consult. Because even I think
use of resources,
and just trying to add it in where you can.
Yeah, exactly. I think we might wrap it up there. The only thing I just want to touch on is a bit of a funny story. So when I was doing a little bit of research myself through Laura Mosley and the Tame the Beast video, it was really great explanation. And I showed it to one of my clients who I thought was struggling. I was like, this might be a good tool. Again, I asked, are you open to it and everything? And said, yeah, that's fine. Long-term clients, so I think they were being polite because the response I said after they watched the video, I said, what did you get out of it? And they said, the bear gets bigger or the beast gets bigger.
Yeah.
And I was like, what does that mean to you? What is that? She's like, oh, I just saw it got bigger and bigger. I'm like, you didn't really understand what was going on, did you? So that was a moment for me going, okay, they weren't open to absorbing the information, or probably I needed to try a different route because they clearly didn't get the message that I wanted to get. But this is something that I found was funny.
Yeah. And it can be hard.
Yeah.
Because some people you think, they'll not be able to see the message. But for other people, we all think in big and beautiful ways. So it doesn't always come across.
Wonderful. Well, a little bit of a wrap up there. What would you say is some takeaway points from this pod for now? Obviously, we do more different analogies and different things, but a bit of a takeaway for our listeners.
Sure. I think supporting your client or your patient wherever they are at in their journey and trying to, better understand them. And then that will allow you to feel like you know the time when to add in those educational type movements or topic. I think also where you can educate on why something's happening, because I know sometimes people will comment that they feel quite alone or isolated or just unsure, and perhaps just get told random pieces of information. So I think even if you're providing something to someone, making sure you're following that up. And saying, hey, we'll touch base on this next week as well. So then if you have any questions or anything comes up, rather than just spurting out that one sentence once. So I think that just connection and going back to what you've talked about, just so then they also make sure they understand it and haven't taken anything in the wrong way, because, we all get a lot of information throughout the day. So we want to make sure everyone can get the best help they need.
Fantastic. As I said, I think we can unpack a lot more about chronic pain in future podcasts. But for now, that is all. Thank you very much for listening. What was the certificate called again? Certificate of?
Professional Certificate in Pain Sciences through UniSA.
Excellent. We might drop a link in the show notes as well if you are interested in doing that. But for now, Chloe, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. So remember to share, like, or follow to keep updated with all our podcasts and educational resources.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.